All right, hey, it's a Tuesday, so you know what that means? It means it's a Stephen Lassan Tuesday on the show. Senior editor, Athlon Sports, the college football encyclopedia, as I like to call him. What's up, Stephen?
Hey, Mike. It's good to talk to you. I have not been trapped in the portal yet. So as every player is saying, with that being said, I am excited to join you and talk all things bowl, SEC championship, and transfer portal season.
Yeah, well, let's start with that SEC championship, Stephen. I mean, what a great game that was. We were calling it the national championship on this show, and I still hold firm to that. So, I think Alabama is probably going to win it all now. But what's your level of surprise that the underdog Alabama, it's like the pesky underdog Crimson Tide with the greatest college coach of all time and a red-hot quarterback. You know, so many people doubted him going into this game. What was your thoughts on Alabama squeaking by Georgia after 29 wins in a row?
Very surprised. Some idiot that's on your show every Tuesday said Georgia was going to win the national championship. They meet the moment, and Alabama proves us wrong again. I was, after the first drive of the game where Georgia, the first possession for Georgia, they went right down and scored. And I thought they're going to dominate this game. This is we might get a blowout in the SEC championship game. But Alabama settled in after that, and you saw like the passing game for Milroe was a little bit consistent, but the defense of Alabama settled in from there. And then you started to see like every time it felt like Georgia was closing the gap, Alabama just made a play. Whether it was Georgia missing the field goal, the turnover, Milroe making plays with his legs, the little shovel pass to get a first down. Alabama just made the play every time. It felt like Georgia was going to get back in it. So I was surprised based upon the pregame read, the first post-drive read for Georgia, and just what's transpired this season. So great win for Alabama. Like you said, the plucky upstart from Tuscaloosa, Alabama, giving us the surprise of the season. We waited all season for some chaos, and we got it in the SEC championship.
Yeah, and I missed this at the time, Stephen, but after the game, Nick Saban said something to the effect of, Brock Bowers and Ladd McConkey, we didn't really have to respect them because they could tell how banged up they were. And, it probably, if this game's held at a different time, Georgia probably wins. And of course, there was questionable calls. I've been hearing a lot of that from Athens, which that's fair, but it is what it is. I mean, Alabama had to play under the same refs, so man, it's just a tough break. Again, after 29 wins, you haven't lost a regular season game in 3 seasons, yet you don't get that opportunity to defend your title in the college football playoff because Saturday night, that was your playoff, and you failed the test there. But thoughts on Alabama going to the college football playoff, Stephen? Do you think they got it right? I get it. If Florida State fan, you got to be just shattered that you went undefeated and you didn't get it done. But I mean, I think it comes down as simply as this, Stephen. Who would Michigan rather face? Would they rather face Alabama or would they rather face Florida State? I think it's an obvious answer to that question.
Wasn't Michigan's reaction when they saw Alabama on the big screen telling? Michigan might be just subdued and just like happy to for what, for whoever and it was announced. Maybe they were just excited to be in the playoff and they didn't need to show a bunch of emotion. I don't know, but when that came up and I saw the reaction there, I was like, maybe it was the hashtag they do not want Alabama. as many teams say they want Bama. I would go back to Georgia for a second. I think the SEC championship game sort of underscored something that you said earlier this year in how hard it is to win national championships back to back, how hard it is to go back to back to back, and also to have a winning streak that approaches 30 games. That run by Georgia is pretty remarkable, but it also eventually a loss was just going to find you at some point. They didn't play their A game and they had their weapons hurt. So a remarkable run. It's also really hard to do. And it's also why it's really hard to three-peat in college football. But on Alabama, I think that when the matchups were announced, the first reaction that I had, Alabama's going to win it all. I think they're playing probably, I mean, they just took down the number one team in the nation in the SEC championship game. I think they're playing as well as anybody since the middle of the season after Jalen Milroe settled in with the way that the defense has played, especially in the SEC championship game, locking down Georgia's passing attack. So the way that Alabama is playing, the growth of Jalen Milroe, I think it was an easy decision. I shouldn't say easy to put Alabama in the playoff, because I do think the committee really wrestled with the Florida State thing, being the fact they are an undefeated Power 5 champion. But there, you could make a case to leave out Texas, Alabama, and Florida State, and you could wrestle with this all day. But it comes back to, if the goal is to pick the best four teams, you can't leave out Alabama. And it has nothing to do with the SEC brand. It has everything to do with what Alabama has accomplished. I mean, they've beaten the committee's number one team last week, number 6 now, number 11, 13, and 21. And I think coaches in the room probably watched Alabama and said, this is a team that we do not want to play right now. So I hate it for Florida State, because I don't know that there was necessarily a 100% right decision, because they are undefeated and they're a power champ. But I think at the end of the day, if the goal is to get the best four teams in there, Alabama's one of the best four, and they've got to be in. So I think the committee at the end of the day got it as right as they could in a very unique and very subjective situation.
Yeah. And can you give us a quick overview of Michigan? Just, not necessarily rehash your entire season or anything, but for people like me, Stephen, I don't watch Michigan, but I watched them 2 years ago against Georgia, and they had no business being on the field as Georgia. I watched them last year against pesky little TCU, and they threw multiple pick sixes, and they let a joke of a team march on through to the national championship. So is this a same old Michigan? We all know they're cheating, so hopefully they don't get to cheat in this matchup. But is this a same old Michigan, or is this the best Michigan to date of the last two that got embarrassed in the college football playoff?
I don't know that they're better than maybe last year's team, but I think they are equipped to win it all. And I think that we'll kind of start with the strengths of this team. Defensively, giving up about 9-10 points a game this season. Some of that's the bad offenses they played in the Big Ten. Teams later in the season, if you look at their schedule, like Penn State, Maryland, Ohio State, they've been able to move the ball a little bit better, but their defense is still very good. J.J. McCarthy, I think one of the Big Ten's best quarterbacks, if not the best, and a running back in Blake Corum, who was one of the top running backs in the country last year, hasn't had such a great year this year. And I think that gets me kind of to the difference of last year's team and this year's team. The offensive line for Michigan is not as good this year. Their rushing attack for Michigan, not as explosive. They're averaging about a full yard less than they did last year. And I wonder, in games, like if you watch them against Ohio State, you watch them against Maryland and in Iowa too this Saturday, I do wonder, like against a defense like Alabama, are they going to be able to spread the field and make enough plays in the passing game? Like if Alabama stops the run, in 3rd and 7, 3rd and 8, can they consistently win against the secondary? Georgia couldn't. Michigan's receivers, I don't think, are better than Georgia's. So I think if you're just kind of looking for the quick overview of this team, strong defense, they're pretty good along the offensive line, not as good as last year, star quarterback, and a good running back in Blake Corum. And of course, there's the whole Michigan versus everybody theme that they've been playing this year, with Jim Harbaugh suspended 6 games and the stealing scandal that later in the year too.
Yeah. I can't wait for that game, January 1st in the Rose Bowl. And then after it, Stephen, this looks like an interesting matchup too in the Sugar Bowl. Texas, Washington, Big 12 champ, Pac-12 champ. Neither one's going to be in that conferences next season, so it's a little weird. But some fresh blood. I know Washington made it once a couple years ago, but second time for them, first time for Texas in the college football playoff. What's your early read on this game, Stephen, and who would you favor as we talk about it here December 4th?
I think it's funny because the first game is probably going to be drastically different than this one. The first one, Alabama, Michigan, is probably going to be a lot more defensive oriented, lower scoring. This one, you might get both teams scoring in the 30s or even 40s. I think it's going to be a high scoring, up and down kind of game. I think if you're like Texas, the first thing you ought to say, we've got an advantage, is our defensive front. The two defensive tackles, Devondre Sweat, Byron Murphy, those two can get pressure on Michael Penix and slow down that Washington passing game. That's really the kind of the matchup for me in this game is Washington's high-powered offense and who can get stops in this game, because the weakest position group in the playoff is Washington's defense. So I think if Texas can just slow down Washington enough in a high-scoring game, it might be a scenario where trading 3 for 7 points, a red zone stop, a stop on third down, or a turnover wins it. So I favor Texas in this one. They actually played in last year's bowl game, in the Alamo Bowl. It doesn't really mean anything because both teams are different. The stakes are different. But Washington won. And I think that familiarity it'll be interesting to see if it means anything here when the two coaches talk after the game. But it will be a much different game. High scoring, two great quarterbacks, a lot of offensive fireworks, and Washington's timely defense will have to step up again if they want to go to the national championship.
Right, and I know they beat Oregon as an underdog in the conference championship. Maybe you could tell me regular season who was favored in that one, and I have no idea, but maybe Southern Cal, were they underdogs in that matchup? And that just reason I ask is it doesn't seem like this team is unfamiliar with beating the expectations.
You know, the weird thing about Washington is if you look at their season, it's almost two different seasons. At the start of the year, they pretty much blew people out. And then they got to Arizona and Oregon in the middle of the season, and things got closer from there. And they didn't look like a playoff team when they played Arizona State, when they played Stanford, or to some extent when they played USC. I mean, every team gets well against USC's defense this year. But, you know, that was a game where they gave up 42. It was kind of like the score it's 52-42. The final is probably a little bit closer on the actual field. But they had a ton of close games, and they remind me a lot of TCU last year. They just keep finding ways to win. Sometimes when you watch them, you're like, and you look at the stat sheet, this defense is not good enough to get stops against an Alabama or a Texas, but they just keep finding ways to do so, and they keep finding ways to win. So they sort of have this TCU thing where everybody keeps doubting them. They find ways to win close games, and they've got a quarterback that I think if he gets hot in this game, he can win it for them, and I think he can also carry them to a national championship. Their offense is that good.
Interesting. All right, well, Stephen, we're going to talk about the other bowl matchups here at the end of the show. I wanted to cut into the transfer portal because that's seemingly all anybody wants to talk about. I asked you to kind of give us some thoughts on what position groups you think each SEC team is potentially going to be heavily focused on adding. But before we get to that, Stephen, I got to ask. Vanderbilt, my goodness. I mean, they're getting devastated here. But just went 0-8 in conference play. They've just lost all three quarterbacks, Stephen, that have taken a snap this year. A.J. Swan, Ken Seals, Walter Taylor, all to the portal. Their top three receivers, Will Shepard, London Humphreys, Jaden McGowan, off into the portal. Number 2 running back, Patrick Smith. And starting defenders, DeRicky Wright, Ethan Barr, and Nate Clifton to the portal. So we're just starting from scratch here. What in the world do we do with Vanderbilt? And we were kind of joking off air. I mean, we may have to go Paul Johnson triple option here just to do something. We got to do something different because we're getting killed here.
Yeah, I think that, you know, you start thinking about where Vanderbilt is right now. I mean, 0-8 in the SEC, and try to start building a case for optimism for next year, especially when you lose like you said, all of your quarterbacks, your top 3 receivers. And some of those guys could be, going to other SEC teams next season. I think that kind of shows the talent that they have in that receiver room. But they pretty much are starting over. And I think what we've also seen in tandem with the transfer portal, it is very hard, I think, to go from 2, 3, 4 wins to bowl games, 8 wins. You have to almost hit on everything. And it's hard to do, I think, because Vanderbilt's probably going to be at the end of that opportunity line. I'm sure they'll attract some quarterbacks because there's only, so there's so many Power 5 quarterbacks that are on the move that one will probably come to Nashville and start. But that means you're going to have to go into the portal to find receivers, quarterback, and you still have to find some other pieces in there. I mean, for a program that's looking for some positive momentum now off an 0-8 season, it's probably like I think it's like the worst case scenario. I mean, Mike, correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, things seem kind of bleak right now for Clark Lee and Vanderbilt. I don't want to be too, prone to hyperbole here, but that's kind of the way it seems to me.
Well, I think it was last week, Stephen, we were talking. You said, "Hey, these Ivy League guys, they don't get a fifth year, so they're all transferring out because they can get an extra year of eligibility. Just send them all down to Vanderbilt. Let's
right.
Take every super senior in the Ivy League. Maybe we can field us a competitive team in Nashville next year. You know what?"
Hey, to be fair, it's not a bad idea because there are several transfers in the Ivy League who could actually probably come in and play right away for Vanderbilt. So that might be their best case scenario here. I like I said, I don't want to be like too Mr. Negative here and to bring back Mr. Negative, but after going 0-8 and you're looking at Texas and Oklahoma coming into the league, all the teams in the league, they seem to be the one that has like the fewest reasons for optimism next year. Even Arkansas, after hiring Bobby Petrino, the whole like off-season narrative has shifted there. Like after that loss to Auburn and Missouri, Petrino's coming back. The optimism meter seems to be getting higher. Would you agree?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. They're all aboard. Hell, I think I tweeted out during that Pac-12 championship game. I was like, man, 4 or 5 SEC teams would whoop both these teams' ass. And one of the commenters was like, and now that we got Bobby Petrino, throw Arkansas in there. I mean, they're on cloud 9. So there is optimism galore. But Stephen, I wanted to ask you about a lot of these portal quarterbacks just a second. But I just thought of something that I thought you'd be a fun person to ask. Juice Wells, South Carolina, officially in the portal. He's got 2 years of eligibility. I couldn't believe that. I didn't know if he had 1 year. Apparently he's got 2 somehow. And then I don't know that this guy has officially entered the portal, but it is expected. Walter Nolen from Texas A&M. And heck, he could return to Texas A&M. So I'm not saying, that's a done deal by any means. But what do you think has a bigger impact? Let's just assume that both these guys stay in the SEC. Which one do you think would you rather have to maybe push your team to that next level? Because these are 2 critical positions of need. An explosive playmaking receiver in Juice Wells when he's as healthy. I thought he was as good as any receiver in the SEC. Walter Nolen, of course, we know this is a line of scrimmage game. You can't win without dominant defensive linemen. So, I mean, there's no wrong answer here, Stephen, but which player do you think has a bigger potential impact on his next team next fall? And I get it, that's probably an impossible question to answer because we don't know where they're going to go, but let's just assume they stay in the SEC. Which player, I guess, would you rather have to make an impact next season?
It's a good debate because, first of all, I think like you said, with Juice Wells, he was a preseason All-American. I had him as a preseason All-American before the 2023 season started and all the injuries, of course. So you're getting a difference maker right away on the outside. But I think you have to go line of scrimmage here. I think anytime you can get a 5-star defensive lineman with the upside to be a difference maker, and he's already shown that too, like at Texas A&M, year 1 to year 2, the growth of Walter Nolen. if you can go out and get a 5-star, and there's not that, I think there will be some difference makers at defensive line, but there's potential there to be pretty elite with Walter Nolen. There's not too many guys in the portal like that. You can always find wide receivers, I think. I think there are more receivers and more defensive backs in the portal than any other position. So it's almost like the replacement level factor, like the drop off between Walter Nolen and sort of the next defensive lineman could be pretty steep, where I could go into the portal and find another receiver that's maybe not as good as Juice Wells, but comparable enough to be functional at receiver. So give me any difference maker at the line of scrimmage, and most importantly, any offensive lineman. If they are a functional, high level offensive lineman, they will be in high demand when the portal opens up.
Perfect solution, Stephen. Just they should both go to Tennessee. We don't have to worry about which one's going to make a bigger impact because they'll both make huge impacts. How about that?
I think, hey, on my list of needs, what do you know? Tennessee needs both. What a coincidence, right?
Exactly. Oh, so we'll get to that in just a second. But a lot of people, they love to talk these quarterbacks, Stephen. And I'll give you the perfect example. Mississippi State, we got a new coach in here, Jeff Lebby. Optimism is high, but the optimism meter, it's not going to reach maximum until we know who our quarterback's going to be. And it doesn't matter who it is, Stephen. We're all going to buy into him. Hail State, we're back, baby. So I have to ask you, Dillon Gabriel, how big of a surprise was that when he entered the portal? I get it. They got a promising young quarterback in Jackson Arnold, but this was pretty surprising. I don't know. There's got to be something behind the scenes where, he's got his next spot figured out or NIL. I have no idea. I'm just speculating, but I would think Dillon Gabriel makes a lot of sense for Mississippi State and maybe some other teams in the SEC. What's your thoughts?
100%. I think he makes a ton of sense for Mississippi State because of the connection to Jeff Lebby. Of course, the connections to UCF. He started there for a couple years, then transferred to Oklahoma, runs the same kind of style of offense. Of course, Lebby was just at Oklahoma. So familiarity, and he's also available to run the scheme. He has 1 year of eligibility left. And I think Gabriel is the perfect case study for NIL because I think he could go to the next level. And I think he could hang on as maybe like a third string or practice squad quarterback. But I think the reality is he's probably more valuable right now to a college team on an NIL deal. So I think he's the perfect case study for how NIL can benefit maybe someone like Dillon Gabriel and also benefit another team in the process. If I think the kind of scouting report that I've seen on him, I don't know that he has the strongest arm of any quarterback in the portal, but I think he's got his accuracy this year, almost 70% at Oklahoma, and he can execute up-tempo spread offense to perfection, and especially with his experience. So if I'm a Mississippi State fan and you can go out and get Dillon Gabriel, you do it. And immediately you have a high-level, capable starter that's already familiar with your system. So I don't think it was a surprise, and it wasn't a surprise, if that makes sense, because he's been in college for 5 years. I kind of just assumed that he would try for the NFL. But I think the fact that they have Jackson Arnold behind him, it's probably time to pass the torch. If not, you probably risk losing him if you're Oklahoma. So I think there's probably some of that that's the new age roster management of quarterbacks. It was time to pass the torch, and Gabriel could also cash in one more time in NIL money this year.
Yeah. And how about this rumor, Stephen? Oh, very curious to get your thoughts. Brock Vandergriff, he's in the portal, Georgia backup, to Kentucky. Now, Matt Jones, Kentucky Sports Radio, several days ago, maybe a week ago, he was teasing like, "Oh, we're getting great news coming quarter." So, I mean, this has probably been in the works. Just speculating. Kentucky tampers. Hell, they all tamper, but I know for a fact Kentucky tampers with all this shit. But Stephen, I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but again, it's well documented, my thoughts on Mark Stoops. So we don't have to rehash that. Seemingly, I do it every week. But I think after the Devin Leary experiment, I think it's safe to say that didn't come close to the expectations. Now, Brock Vandergriff, former 5-star, all the talent in the world. I get it. I got to be honest with you. I was never enamored with him. I never thought he'd play at Georgia after watching him a little bit in high school and watching him in the spring games. If you're Mark Stoops, if you're Liam Cohen, would you be excited to get? I mean, I guess you need a quarterback. I get it, but would you be over the moon getting Brock Vandegrift when there's all these other guys in the portal? What's your thoughts on that? Because if he's a bust, and I'm not saying he is, because that's not fair. We've not seen enough of him in a meaningful action. He may be the next Joe Burrow for all I know, but I think Mark Stoops is one bad season from being on the hot seat. I really do. And if this is the guy they get and he's a bust, then your job could be on the line. What's your thoughts on all that?
Is Mark Stoops just looking to cash in a few more 7 and 8 win seasons until Iowa comes open? Maybe. You know what sells in college football? Hope, optimism, potential, and that's what Brock Vandergriff I think could bring to Kentucky. I think you mentioned the 5-star status coming out of high school. There's some untapped potential there. Also, I would trust Liam Cohen sort of to figure this out. And I said that before this season and it didn't work out. So I don't know how well I would take myself too seriously by saying that. But yeah, the Devin Leary experiment didn't work out as well as I think Kentucky hoped and we hoped this offseason when we were kind of talking about potential optimism scenarios for Kentucky. So I think there's the potential. I think if you're Kentucky, you have to get a quarterback. You can't go into next year with the guys on the roster. You've already had some attrition there through the portal. So you have to get at least one. Maybe you have to go get a second one. Personally, I like some of the other quarterbacks in the portal a little bit more than Brock Vandegrift. So I would probably lean towards getting somebody that's a little bit more proven and a little bit more experienced than going after someone who's, got a handful of passes. He might be, like you said, he might be the next Joe Burrow, the next Will Levis, but you're also banking on a lot of upside there. And I think I personally would prefer a much more sure thing at quarterback.
Yeah, I'm sure that's what the message is. They're saying you're Will Levis 2.0. You'll kill it. We'll make you a draft pick here. But could they not get that maybe from say like a Will Howard, a Tyler Van Dyke? I mean, who would stand out to you as someone that is in the portal that makes sense for Kentucky, in your opinion?
What do you think about Will Rogers and the fit for Kentucky?
I would think, honestly, I think that would be a poor fit. But
yeah,
apparently Washington's already looked at him. So their quarterback,
which also seems like an odd fit to me too. But
well, yeah, I was going to say, but heck, I mean, they're in the playoff and they got the most out of Michael Penix, so clearly they know what they're doing. But maybe a lot of these coaches got a higher opinion of Will Rogers than even I do. So yeah, I mean, I think I would rather have. In fact, I know I would. I'd rather have Will Rogers than Brock Vandegrift because we just don't know anything about Vandegrift in a big time spot to where at least we know with Will Rogers, not that he's the greatest, but he's far from bad. You know what I mean? Like he's a known quantity, which I think you need because whoever you're getting at Kentucky, you're basically saying here's our starter, and I would not roll out a guy out that's never played the meaningful snap.
I think it gets back to kind of what we were talking about a minute ago. If you're weighing Will Rogers and maybe even throw like DJ Uiagalelei in there too from Oregon State, I think you kind of know who these quarterbacks are. But if you have someone like Vandegrift who has this untapped talent, you can bank on some of that upside and sell that as what you're going to get out of DJU. He could be steady. And he may get you 6 wins, but Vandegrift might be the guy that's good enough to get you to 8 or 9 wins next year. You mentioned Will Howard. I think he's rock solid. I like him personally a little bit better than some of the other names we've thrown out here. I also would throw out like Grayson McCall at Coastal Carolina, and he's been he's been a little bit banged up this year, but look at his track record at Coastal Carolina as far as like taking care of the ball, the mobility, the accuracy he's had. Maybe that doesn't translate as well to Kentucky, and I think NC State is kind of on the doorstep of getting a commitment from him. But there's a ton of names so far that are way more proven, and that I think would be a better solution than sort of banking on Vandergriff at this point.
Mm-hmm. And so what's your thoughts on guys that, and I'm just coming from a pure place of ignorance here, Stephen, but like Cam Ward at Washington State, I hear good things about him. Dante Moore from UCLA, who I think he got benched. I was surprised Kyle McCord, Ohio State. I didn't watch them much, but I thought he had a good season. And heck, they're in the New Year's Six playing Missouri, and yet their quarterback's in the portal. Is there a pecking order of any of these other guys that you think would be good fits for any SEC teams looking for a portal quarterback?
Absolutely. So Dante Moore is kind of a more experienced version of Brock Vandergriff, if you will, because he was a 5-star quarterback coming out of last year's signing class. You may remember him because he flipped from Oregon to UCLA, I think either close to signing day or on that first early signing day. It didn't work out for him at UCLA, but the talent is there. And, he's from Michigan, so maybe he ends up back in Michigan. Maybe he ends up somewhere else like Ohio State too. Kyle McCord was pretty surprising to me to see him enter the portal from Ohio State. I think it's a case of Ohio State might just be trying to upgrade. And that brings me to Cam Ward, because I think he's probably the best quarterback in the portal right now. And I think Ohio State, Florida State, if they decide to go after a quarterback, Oregon, maybe even Auburn, anybody that needs a quarterback is probably going to get in on the Cam Ward sweepstakes. I think he's number one. Dante Moore, based upon potential. I like Will Howard and kind of Dillon Gabriel and Grayson McCall is kind of your top 5 or so signal callers in the portal. Tyler Van Dyke, I should say, at Miami is interesting because he has shown, and this goes back to the 2021 season, just far as being a pure passer of the ball, when it's there, he can do it. And he's been banged up. They had some poor coaching hires. He might be a rebound candidate for some team that's looking for a quarterback in the portal. You're taking on some risk, but also you can watch that 2021 season and sort of see something, I think, that you might be able to mold in the SEC.
Safe to say a guy's inconsistent when Steven is pointing to the 2021 season as a sign for the guy doing something good. But I get it. You're right. I mean, Hendon Hooker was anything but consistent till he started playing for Josh Heupel. So right system for the right player, these guys can take off. There's no doubt about it. And
I think, Mike, you should also assume too that the portal's probably not done with quarterbacks entries too. There might be some more over the next, I think, week or so. I think that's fair to say.
Yeah.
But I do think there is a little bit of urgency, though, if you're looking, because it's like a domino effect, because once names start to get in, they start committing. If you're looking to move, you have to get in early, too.
Right. And it would be an interesting place to be in. Say you're, I don't know, I'm just completely speculating here, but like Ty Simpson at Alabama, and Arch Manning at Texas, who I believe he just committed to returning. But, where your path to playing may not be there next season, but heck, you could be playing in a month because a starter could get hurt for a national championship. So that's a tough place for some of these playoff quarterbacks to be in, I would think.
Throw Malik Murphy in there from Texas too, who started some this year. Like you said, looks like Arch Manning's coming back, but I think Malik Murphy might be one of those guys who's on the move, but they're in the playoff. So
can you go into the portal and keep playing, and then Arch Manning commits to Tennessee but plays for Texas, wins a national championship, then transfers? I mean, is that even legal? I don't even know.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, you can do that. There are players like last year. A good example of that was Austin Reed at Western Kentucky. He entered the portal, played in the bowl game for Western Kentucky, kind of hinted that he was going to be back. But there are players that do that. They'll play in the bowl game, they'll just come back. And there's also a rule this year too, where if your bowl game is in, or say you're in the national championship, after those games are done, you have 5 days to enter the portal. So you might see a wave of Alabama, Michigan, Washington, Texas players enter the portal January 5th or so at this point.
Gotcha. All right, Steve. Well, hey, I asked you ahead of time to have a list ready for, positions of need that you could see each SEC team trying to pursue via the transfer portal. And it's a difficult question because we don't know right now super seniors who all is officially returning. We don't know officially guys that have declared for the draft. And heck, you probably didn't have Vanderbilt needing quarterbacks and receivers a week ago, but since they've lost guys to the portal, now all of a sudden that's a position of need. So a lot of variables in here. But as the portal has just officially opened today, and again, we're looking ahead to next season. So people have complained, Stephen. Why you throw Oklahoma and Texas in here? Well, you can't complain anymore because the guys they're adding today are going to be suiting up in the SEC. They're not going to be suiting up ever again in the Big 12. So we're adding Texas and Oklahoma. So 16 teams. Just kind of an overview, Stephen, of where you think each team may need to attack via the portal. And let's just go in alphabetical order. So how about Alabama?
I think the first thing for Alabama is going to be, NFL draft. Like they're going to lose some guys, and I think, like you said, that makes it kind of hard to pinpoint where they need. But also, I think they're going to be in pretty good position next year when you start looking at their depth chart. Start thinking about early 2024 stuff. But I think a few needs. Like obviously, if we assume Dallas Turner goes to the NFL, they're probably going to need to maybe consider adding a difference maker off the edge. I think you could also assume that like running back and receiver, there might be some attrition. They have some seniors, some guys may declare early, some guys may transfer. I think secondary was a focus this year in the portal. Jalen Key, Trey Amos, McKinstry, Terrion Arnold. I think you have to assume they're going to be gone to the NFL. And also I think offensive tackles. They're going to lose probably J.C. Latham to the NFL, but they look to find a starter in the portal. So Alabama has a few needs. I don't know that they're incredibly pressing, but they do have a few needs this offseason.
Mm-hmm. And how about Arkansas, Stephen? This has got to be a tough one because we still don't know officially what KJ is going to do. Could come back, could enter the portal. Heck, he could even go pro for all I know. But as I'm aware here on Monday, I don't think he's made any determination. So what do you have for Arkansas taking that into consideration?
Yeah, I think the biggest needs right now for Arkansas are all on offense right now. Because I think, like you said, whatever KJ Jefferson decides sort of dictates how your offseason is going to go. Because if he leaves, you're going to need another quarterback, maybe even two, to compete with Criswell. I think Arkansas could stand to add a difference maker, a receiver too, somebody who can help them stretch the field a little bit more. But I think that if KJ Jefferson comes back, or if he doesn't, they have to fix the offensive line. They've got one commitment in the transfer portal already from Michigan State, Keyshawn Blackstock. I think they need to add others there. So offensive line, quarterback, and receiver are probably my biggest needs for Arkansas next year.
Mm-hmm. How about Auburn, Stephen? This is an interesting one because clearly they're doing very well in high school recruiting, and they did well in the portal after Hugh Freeze got there to kind of rework the trenches. They added a bunch of receivers. Didn't really get a lot of difference makers there. They added some running back. I mean, they added everything. A quarterback, of course. Will they go quite as crazy, you think? Because Auburn's a team to watch, Stephen. That year 2 jump under Hugh Freeze. I mean, we're crazy down here. Would they win 7 games year 1? The expectation is 8, 9 minimum. Otherwise, you're going to be on the hot seat. So they're going to need some players to get there.
Isn't it? I think it's maybe this isn't fair. I think a lot of their needs are actually what they added last year. Because I think they're probably going to have to add another quarterback. Peyton Thorne, I think, was way more inconsistent than I anticipated him being in the passing game. Some of that wasn't on him. Some of that was receivers. That was a need last year. It's probably a need again this year. They're probably going to have some, I would assume, attrition on the offensive line and the defensive line as well. So I think trenches and I think passing game, quarterbacks, receivers, can Auburn land a difference maker to beat out Thorne, or do they just add somebody to compete with him? I'm really fascinated to see where this Auburn quarterback battle goes this offseason.
Right. And I mean, I'm just completely making up his scenario, Stephen, but let's not be naive. When you get a quarterback out of the portal, you very likely there was NIL involved. And again, I don't even know if this is legal or what, but I wonder if they, again, Peyton Thorne, he wasn't awful. Let's not say he was awful, but and maybe he got a little bit better. Well, hell, they did lose to New Mexico State, but I'm thinking the Iron Bowl. He was good in the Iron Bowl.
Defense for that one.
But could you imagine a scenario where they're like, again, I'm completely making this up, but maybe Cam Ward is like, hey, I'll go to Auburn, and they say, well, hey, guess what, Peyton? We don't have NIL for you anymore. We have to shift it over here. I mean, I think that is a scenario that could happen in college football, and if it's perceived as a massive upgrade, that would not stun me at all. Would it stun you?
Not at all. Peyton Thorne, I think, like I said, it's not all of his fault that they had issues in the passing game this year. But if you tell me you can go get Cam Ward, I'm doing it. I'm doing it in a heartbeat. I think he upgrades the quarterback room at Auburn. No question about it. I just think he's a different player in the passing game. I think too, he can also give you a little bit in the run game too, much like Peyton Thorne did. So, if Cam Ward wants to come to Auburn, I would take him over Peyton Thorne.
Yeah. All right. How about Florida, Stephen? This is obviously a pivotal year for Billy Napier, but I think, for all the bad things I say about Billy Napier, I will say he has done an excellent job in my determination, Stephen, of identifying talent and implementing them in his offense, and that goes Graham Mertz, Ricky Pershaw. He's had Montrell Johnson and Osiris Torrance and Caleb Jackson. I mean, several players all over the field. But they have some big needs here as well at Florida. I'll be interested to see how active they are. I've seen a lot of their fans, Stephen. They're like, God, we're so just slow to offer everybody. I mean, there's something to complain about everything, but I think they have to be kind of picky, and they can't just offer everybody. But where could you see Florida kind of attacking via the portal?
Let me see if you agree with me on this one. I think from an offensive standpoint, I actually think they're not in bad shape here. They're going to bring back pretty much everybody, we think, but unless there's some surprise draft or transfers. Ricky Pearsall being the one that's expected to move on. Mm-hmm. But defensively, I think you can basically just pencil in defensive difference makers and impact players across the board. Because you look at it, whether it's just advanced metrics, basic metrics, Florida at the bottom of the league. And can you find some guys maybe that fit Austin Armstrong's system? Maybe he wants to, maybe whatever scheme changes, implement whatever he wants to do. Find some guys. I think you need to find some guys who can get to the quarterback. I think you need to find some guys who can cover. So I think I would go into this offseason, if I'm a Florida fan, feeling good that anybody that this staff brings in offensively is probably going to be a good addition because of their track record, like you mentioned. But I think they've got to add some guys on defense, because otherwise, I mean, it is a defense that brings back a lot, but also I'm struggling to find a whole host of difference makers here. Do you agree?
Yeah, sir. Certainly. I think Austin Armstrong would agree with that assessment as well. They need some help there, but they've got, again, they had the injuries, and they got a lot of promising youngsters. So I'm not writing them off, but they need guys that can play immediately, because I don't think there is a year for Billy Napier if they go 5-7 again. I truly don't.
I agree with you, and I think the urgency needs to be like, it felt like there may be some guys that were added in the past who they could be there for multiple years, and which isn't a bad strategy. But I think at this point, you have to go find there's no patience here anymore. You've had another losing season. In order to have that 7, 8, 9 win type of season, there has to be guys that are just flat out difference makers, and there has to be some urgency, I think, to add to this side of the ball.
Mm-hmm. Now, how about Georgia, Stephen? I mean, do they even have any deficiencies last all season? I mean, it was like everybody wanted Ra Thomas. Everybody wanted Dominique Lovett. I didn't even know Georgia was in it for those guys, and I know Tennessee and Auburn and Florida. I mean, they were all coveting these guys, and they all go to damn Georgia. So I guess the real question, Stephen, what elite players will Georgia steal next from other SEC teams?
Yeah, it's almost like you already have the garage full of Ferraris and Porsche and your Mercedes. Like what more luxury picks can Georgia add to the arsenal? Because they're going to be really good. Obviously, once again next year, I think there are a few areas where they could maybe look to add. There's going to be some attrition up front on defense. There's going to be some attrition in the secondary. You mentioned the receivers. Does any of those guys jump early to the NFL? Could there be some turnover there? Maybe they look to add a running back. Milton and Edwards are both seniors. They've had a lot of injuries there the last couple years. I don't think any of these are glaring needs. And also, I think Georgia can be very selective in who they add. So I think whoever they add is probably going to be a high-end impact player that probably already knows he's going to Georgia before he enters the portal.
Mm-hmm. How about Kentucky, Stephen? We already talked about quarterback. That one's kind of obvious. So any other positions stand out to you for Kentucky for that could help them have a big bounce back season next fall?
Yeah, I think running back is going to be a position too with Ray Davis moving on. Not sure if he's going to play in the bowl game either. So I think the turnover at quarterback, running back, I think solidifying any kind of needs at the line of scrimmage. There's some seniors there. We'll see if Kentucky brings any of those guys back. And of course, they did struggle a lot to stop the pass this year too. So can they find some a safety, a corner that could be an impact player to sort of shore up the back end of the defense? Maybe you would not be surprised if they added a receiver to add some depth there with Tavion Robinson out of eligibility. They sort of have a lot of needs here, but I think none bigger than quarterback, and then adding somebody to fill in the shoes of Ray Davis at running back.
Now, how about LSU, Stephen? This team fascinates me. They added via the portal last year and virtually struck out with every defensive back, and they added many. Now some of that's due to injuries and other things, but I've heard Brian Kelly on multiple occasions, Stephen, say, hey, we had some misevaluations in the portal. So I'm kind of curious, the route they take to correct some of these issues. Do they go via the portal again? Do they, it's more of I almost said draft and develop, but recruit and develop. I mean, it's at the same time, Stephen, I mean, if they, would they finish third? Of course, there's not going to be divisions next year, but third in the West, that ain't going to cut it in Baton Rouge. Not with $100 million contract and you won the West the first year. We can't afford a step back. So they're in an interesting spot. They need some playmakers, but they mismanaged the portal last year. What if anything do you expect LSU to do in the portal?
I think two spots are glaring needs right away. I think we have to assume that Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas are going to the NFL. The juniors, I expect they'll probably move on. So if that's the case, receivers, got to find playmakers for Garrett Nussmeier next season. And then the secondary. For the third year in a row, I would expect LSU to be very active in trying to find some defensive backs to fill corners, safety, nickel, whatever it is. Last year's strategy to sort of add defensive backs who have multiple years of eligibility was smart. They had bad luck with injuries and they just missed on them. But I still think they have to try and solidify that group again this offseason. So I would expect some additions there. wouldn't totally be surprised. Defensive front too. They really added some bodies last year. You have to have quality depth in the SEC, obviously up front. So a addition or two along the defensive line would not surprise me one bit either.
Mm-hmm. Now, how about the Portal King, Stephen? Ole Miss, I mean, my goodness, probably every position is the real answer. They just flip their roster like it's a dang pancake. But any specific positions stand out more than any others?
I wrote down literally every position on the roster because that's who Lane Kiffin is. The Portal King is going to be shopping early and often in the transfer portal. Ole Miss does have a lot of seniors listed at along the offensive line and on defense. Some of those guys could come back based upon super senior seasons, so they might have an area of focus or two along the offensive line and some of the spots on defense. They've been pretty active too in adding receivers the last 2 years. I would probably expect them to try and find someone else there this offseason too. But you said it best. With Lane Kiffin, I think we can assume that every position is on the table. Maybe not quarterback if Jackson Dart returns, and they have Walker Howard too, though.
Yeah, let's see if they add 3 quarterbacks again this offseason. That'd be pretty wild. All right, new to the SEC, Oklahoma, Stephen. What position group? And I've seen a lot of their older defensive players jumping in the portal. Of course, Dillon Gabriel starting quarterback in the portal. So they've been kind of active losing guys. So I have to imagine they're going to add some pieces. What position groups stand out for the Sooners?
I would expect defensive line to be an area of focus. They have a lot of seniors who could move on or are moving on. Also, it's been an area of focus for Brent Venables the last 2 off seasons. You're trying to get ready to come into the SEC. You've got to have depth and talent along both lines of scrimmage. They've been adding over the last 2 off seasons. I would expect some more additions this year too. So I would expect line of scrimmage. They've had some attrition at running back too, so they might look to add a player or two there for depth. We talked about Dillon Gabriel leaving. Could they add a experienced quarterback to back up Jackson Arnold? That could be one area of focus. But I do think coming into the SEC, Oklahoma is in a much better spot than they were last season. I think Venables has done a good job of getting his program on stable foundation coming into 2024.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of Oklahoma, their former coordinator, Jeff Lebby, now at Mississippi State. So a roster flip. And again, 5 years ago, this would have been a total disaster where probably wouldn't even be fair to judge Jeff Lebby until year 3, year 4. But we live in a new era, Stephen, and by God, he better win, and it better be fun next year. So how do they get there? I mean, I have to imagine it's basically every position on offense.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think the biggest need is quarterback. If you can go out and get Dillon Gabriel, like we talked about, immediately your quarterback situation is 1,000% better than it was on December 4th this year, because you would have a proven high-level guy to operate that offense. But, the other thing that stands out to me about Mississippi State is, and I hate to go back to this, there are a ton of seniors. It's offensive line. Tulu Griffin at receivers. It's been reported he's going to go to the NFL. Defensively, defensive line, secondary, linebackers. There are seniors everywhere on this 2 deep. So I think Mississippi State will be very active in just adding a lot of depth, and they may be able to be a little bit more focused once they get the super seniors back. But quarterback, maybe some playmakers at receiver too, and then restocking the defense. Those are the priorities for me for Jeff Lebby.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I've heard it. Xavier Thomas, their punt returner receiver, maybe leaving, headed to LSU, which would go to your. They need targets there at LSU, so maybe getting a swap here. How about the Missouri Tigers, Stephen? This is another program under Drink that has done a very excellent job identifying and developing and implementing these transfers. It's fixed their defense. And, of course, Theo Weiss, Cody Schrader, offensive lineman. I mean, they've added pieces, and they've done it well. Where could you see Missouri attacking in the portal?
I think that was the first thing that I wrote down for Missouri was when you look back at some of their transfer classes for the last 2 years, this staff under Eli Drinkowitz, they've done a really nice job of bringing in guys who we thought were high level impact ones and they worked out. And also guys like, I mean, Cody Schrader was a walk on, but there are others who that didn't really seem like they were going to be that much of an impact guy and they worked out. So I think credit to Missouri staff for finding guys that fit their system. And I think when you start thinking ahead for this year, the first place that jumps out to you is the defensive line. There's a lot of seniors on that defensive front. So I think defensive line, can you bring in some running backs to replace Cody Schrader? You're also losing Nathaniel Pete, and the offensive line too. Delgado and Javon Foster, both seniors. So you could have some attrition on both lines of scrimmage, and you got to find some running backs to help replace the departure of Cody Schrader.
Mm-hmm. How about South Carolina, Stephen? They really need an injection of talent here. They've already lost a ton of guys, but most of them not key contributors. So, it's not like their roster's devastated by any means, but they are losing Spencer Rattler and Xavier Legette. They're two best players, I think, by a country mile this season. So, and Beamer and company, very active in the portal. Every year they've been there. So I anticipate that to continue. Where do you think the Gamecocks could go?
I think on offense, I think there's two spots that jump out right away. And I think there might be a little obvious to most fans. I think number one is receiver. We talked about Juice Wells. You mentioned Xavier Legette and Marion Brown. There's a lot of turnover there. You need some depth and you also need some talent. So I expect receiver to be high in the list. Also, offensive line. You're going to get Jalen Nichols back this year at tackle. Some young guys got experience. Still think you need to add some starters here. Everybody's looking for offensive linemen in the portal, but I think South Carolina will have to try and add a body or two there. And of course, running back. The ground game struggled this year for a variety of reasons. Can you go out and add another back or two to give you some big playability there? On defense, I think secondary's got to be the area of focus. I think secondary and also finding guys who can get to the quarterback. They were tied for the fewest amount of sacks this year in the SEC. I know they changed some defensive schemes late in the year. Maybe they found something with using more three-man front. Still think you got to find some difference makers in the front seven. So secondary and defensive end difference makers, I guess, is maybe a good way to put it, is where I'm focusing for South Carolina.
Yeah. And how about Tennessee, Stephen? Again, this is another program that, again, they're not awful by any means, but I think it's fair. Their fans will say did not live up to the hype, so they can't afford to do that 2 years in a row. What position groups do you think Tennessee needs to add to where they can have a bounce-back season?
I think let's start with probably the most glaring need for Tennessee, and that's fixing the secondary. I think you have to be – they're going to have some losses up front, but when you have guys like James Pierce and you've developed some other guys up front, you feel pretty good about your defensive line ability going forward under Tim Banks if they can continue to recruit and develop. Secondary, though, has been a problem for 2 years in a row. They have to get it fixed. So I expect defensive backs to be an area of focus. Offensively, I think receiver is a need for Tennessee. I mean, I know that they may bring a lot of these guys back, but they need some difference makers here. They need some guys who can stretch the field, be a little bit more consistent this year, especially to bring back that big play consistency that we saw out of Tennessee under Hendon Hooker. And also, I think depending on who leaves, I think offensive line will be an area of focus for Tennessee as well.
Mm-hmm. And to go along with receivers, tight end. They desperately need help at tight end. Basically every position group on offense. Josh Heupel, I thought that was your strength. What the hell are we doing here? How about Texas? Again, that's probably a hard one to read because they're all locked in. They got a playoff run. Who knows? They could be the national champion. And if they are, I'm claiming that as an SEC title, Stephen. But does Texas, they got more NIL money than anybody. So they're right up there. I have to imagine they're going to be a factor for a lot of big-time transfers.
No doubt about it. I think Texas is in the same position that Georgia is in Alabama to some extent, is they're adding luxury. They're adding high end. They're not looking necessarily for bulk. They're looking for like high quality 5 stars. So I think just a few spots that I have my eye on. I think your receiving core, because guys like Xavier Worthy, tight end Jatavian Sanders, they're all juniors. They could go to the NFL. So I think playmakers for Quinn Ewers or Arch Manning next year might want to add a proven one. Defensive linemen, because you're going to lose a couple guys to the NFL, and defensive backs. That the secondary at times this year for Texas was not probably up to their standard. They've had some injuries, but they also have some promising talent. They're just going to have some turnover at safety that they may want to bring somebody in to compete next year.
Well, I've already heard, Stephen, that Juice Wells and Walter Nolen, two of the teams that interest them, Texas. So the rich get richer, of course.
Hey, I'm going to go ahead and call. I don't know if I should call it out because I don't want to make too many bold predictions and be looking dumb here in a few months. I'm just going to go ahead and say I think Texas, Alabama, and Georgia could be like 3 of your top 5 in your early 2024 top 5 teams. That is.
The SEC just keeps getting tougher. Yeah. That's what. How about speaking of rich, A&M? Again, who knows if they got the deep pockets after paying off Jimbo? But Mike Elko, got to imagine he's going to be reworking this roster this offseason.
Absolutely. So I think A&M, for the most part, is pretty well equipped next year to be a pretty solid team. Potentially in the top 25, get Connor Wigman back healthy and figure out what they're going to do with the coaching staff. I think depending on who leaves at receiver, Anaya Smith is already going on to the NFL. Maybe you look to add there another playmaker or two. Some small areas too, like offensive line. It's been a group that struggled. Is there any high-level players that A&M could add to come in and start right away? And we also saw at times this season that defensive backs were an issue for A&M. It's a place where they lost a lot last year. They added some guys. Maybe they look to add another couple bodies there this offseason.
And then last and least here, Vanderbilt. I mean, we kind of already hit on them. They got needs everywhere. It's probably too hard to even narrow it down, but it has to start with quarterback, right?
100%. I think one quarterback at least, but you probably need to add 2 to realistically because of how many you're losing, and you probably have to find depending on who your starter is. If you take a veteran, I think you want to take a younger guy to sort of push him or to potentially start in 2025. So quarterback, wide receiver, everywhere in defense for Vanderbilt.
God, that's depressing, Stephen. Let's get on with a happier note here. And I can't think of a happier fan base than Mizzou, Stephen. Credit to you. You've been calling it for a while. New Year's 6 bowl-bound Mizzou Tigers. That's exactly where they ended up, in the Cotton Bowl, one of the most prestigious bowl games and venues down there in Arlington, AT&T Stadium, against mighty Ohio State. I think this is a perfect opportunity, Stephen, for Mizzou to put a cap on this historic season and beat a team that's nationally prominent, that there's probably a lot of people nationally that still don't give Mizzou the respect they deserve. But if you beat a team like Ohio State, how can you say anything other than Mizzou was elite this year?
Right. And the other thing is, we're going to hear this in the next couple of weeks. Ohio State's going to be missing Marvin Harrison Jr. probably as he prepares for the NFL. Kyle McCord transferred. So they're going to be playing a backup quarterback. They're just going to be playing a shell of who Ohio State was, which isn't necessarily false. But I will point out that Ohio State has one of the best defenses still in college football, and not all those guys are going to be preparing for the NFL draft in this game. So if Missouri wins this game, they're going to be beating a team that still has a ton of 4 and 5 stars on both sides of the ball, and they're probably still not going to get enough credit for winning this game. But I think just that's the setup when I look at this game. A ton of veterans from Missouri, all that they've been through, finishing out the year in one of the biggest bowl games and tried to finish out on a high note against an Ohio State team that, it's missing some guys, but still has a lot of talent there. And that's I kind of like Missouri to right now on early lean to win this game. I think they're going to be plenty motivated for this one. And I think with the trying to get guys like Brady Cook and Cody Schrader to finish out the year on a high note. I think this is a good spot for Missouri.
Mm-hmm. And then in the Orange Bowl, Stephen, we got Georgia, Florida State. And as if we needed any more reason why Florida State doesn't belong in the playoffs, Stephen. Georgia's like a 2-touchdown favorite. And we know, well, we don't know, but there's likely to be opt-outs and things of that nature. But here's what I really wanted to ask you, Stephen, about this game specifically. Remember last year, Alabama, Nick Saban, Papa, he begged and he pleaded, get us in the playoff, put us, what does the point spread say? The point spread says, well, no one cares about that, Papa. But they went in here and they have Bryce Young, they got Will Anderson, future number 1, future number 3 pick. 99% of college football probably anticipated those guys opting out. These games don't mean anything. And they said, no, this finishing with our team, that means everything to us. And I realize, different team, different year, but I think that really spoke to the program down there in Alabama and just all the good that Nick Saban has instilled in creating this culture, this winning culture, this championship culture that obviously aided this team this season after a rough start. And that's a long, rambling statement there, Stephen, to get to this. Again, Kirby's had, he has the same thing, where if you're not in the playoff, it's a failure. And particularly after winning back-to-back national championships. But will you judge Kirby and Georgia at all if they have a bunch of opt-outs? If they no-show this bowl game? We have seen that before from Georgia when they don't make a playoff, that they kind of no-show a big matchup like this. And does that tell you anything about Georgia next season? Is any of that fair, or am I being unfair with these comparisons?
It might be a touch unfair. I'm not going to judge Georgia or Florida State too much on who is in this game, because really the biggest key to this game is motivation. I mean, if you're Florida State, are you motivated to play in the Orange Bowl after getting left out of the playoff? Probably not. But maybe they are. Maybe they're motivated.
Couldn't Florida State win and maybe some poll vote them national champion?
I mean, if I was Florida State, why not? Why not print the national championship banner like UCF did and do the parade and do the T-shirts, the hats, everything? Why not? I mean, you'd be 14-0, and right. you can say you beat a number 1 Georgia, a team that was ranked number 1. Why not? So I think that's the thing. Like, who's motivated for this game? The other thing, for Brock Bowers and for Georgia, he's been hurt most of this last stretch of the season. If he opts out, I wouldn't blame him for it just because of the injury factor. But I'm not. This to me is like, it's the Orange Bowl, but it's really it's the motivation bowl. Who shows up and who's motivated to win this one?
And I'm sure you remember this, Stephen, but who did Central Florida beat in that bowl game to go undefeated? Do you remember?
That was Gus Malzahn and Auburn, right? After
losing the SEC champion.
Right.
So it's like, it's all the way around. I mean, it's gone full circle here. If they beat them, they're going to claim the national title, even though it'll be just as relevant as UCF's that year.
Hey, there's a ton of like crazy national championships in the history of college football to like read through, like some of these in the 40s and the 50s, and some random dudes poll and is national champion. So like I said, why not? And
if memory serves, Stephen, Alabama won that year, the real national championship, and they were not undefeated. So, I mean, it could be the exact same scenario, because I remember Central Florida, their argument was only one went undefeated.
That's right. That's right.
All right, how about the Peach Bowl, Stephen? Another New Year's Six. This was a surprise. Ole Miss, Penn State in the Peach Bowl. Lane Kiffin says no opt-outs anticipated, so we should be full go here for Ole Miss. Thoughts on this matchup?
I love this matchup. I hope both teams are at full strength, because it's a great matchup of Ole Miss's offense against Penn State's defense. Penn State's defense is one of the best in the country. led by defensive coordinator Manny Diaz, old SEC friend. He's done a great job up there in Happy Valley. So is James Franklin, the Penn State head coach. But yeah, it really is. It's Jackson Dart, Quinshot Judkins against a standout Penn State defense. Also, I think motivation for Ole Miss. I didn't get the sense they were too interested in playing in the Texas Bowl last year, but that was just me from my from my couch. I think they'll be motivated to play the Peach Bowl this year. And also, I think just a chance to send some of those guys who played a lot of ball the last couple of years out on a high note in a game that should mean a lot for the program. This one's got a lot of intrigue for me.
Right, and I wanted to ask you that specifically, Stephen, on this game, because I think you could say many similar things about Lane Kiffin and James Franklin. A lot of people like them. A lot of people hate them. It's fair to say they rarely, if ever, win a big game. Which coach do you think needs this one more? Because you lose this one again, it's like, I don't know. I feel like the losing coach is going to have to hear that all off season. You didn't win a damn game that was meaningful.
Oh, no question. I think that's a really good comparison because James Franklin this year has been given a ton of flack for not measuring up to Ohio State or Michigan. I would probably say it's Franklin. I think of the two coaches, like, I don't think either one of them is like anywhere near the hot seat, but I think just based upon the way the season played out, I'd say probably Penn State. I think they're favored in the early spreads too. So I would go Franklin probably needs it more.
Now, how about the ReliaQuest Bowl, Stephen? LSU, Wisconsin, somehow, some way, we got robbed of this LSU Notre Dame Brian Kelly Bowl matchup here. But again, this is a tough one because we don't even know who's going to be suiting up for LSU. But let's just assume, for the sake of argument, that their star players suit up in this one. Any chance Wisconsin gives them a ball game if LSU's key players play?
I don't think so. I think if LSU's at full strength, I think they should win this game. Not easily, but I think, I should say, it won't be the level of blowout that we saw last year in LSU's bowl game, but I think they should. I mean, Wisconsin this year, new coach Luke Fickell, probably one of the more, I don't want to say disappointing teams in the Big Ten, but they were not as good, I think, as most people thought this year. And they don't have their best player, running back Braylon Allen. They've had a couple receivers already transfer out. So on paper, if you're Jaden Daniels and you play in this game and you want to go out on a high note, there's the potential right here. I think LSU's a big favorite, and I think good reason why.
Mm-hmm. Now, how about the Citrus Bowl down in Orlando, Stephen? Tennessee, Iowa. The over-under is something ridiculous, like 30-something points. I can't. I mean, I guess I watched Iowa in the Big Ten championship. They did look good on defense.
Did you fall asleep?
Yeah, pretty much did. Thankfully, the Florida State Louisville was on to keep me awake. But my goodness, Steve, Tennessee doesn't have much of an offense this year. But again, and we don't even know the quarterback for Tennessee in this matchup. But big game, I think, for Heupel and company. Get to 9 wins. I think 8-5. I think people are going to be very dissatisfied if they go 8-5 and lose to damn Iowa.
Oh, no question. I would say if you have small children, I don't know that you want to expose them to the Iowa offense this year. It could be, it might not be safe for work too. It's a struggle. They've had a lot of injuries, to be fair to Iowa's offense, but it's bad. And it's one of the reasons why Brian Ferentz, the offensive coordinator, is not going to be there next year, which is one of the storylines for me in this game, because Kirk Ferentz and Iowa, how they're going to win this game. They're going to win it with defense, and they're going to win it with our awesome punter. Tory Taylor is one of the best in the country. And every time you watch an Iowa game, this is what they'll do. They will punt, and they will play good defense, and they will just try to keep flipping the field 10 yards at a time until they can get it into scoring range. So it will be a slog if you're a Tennessee fan. And with the fact that it is Brian Ferentz's last game, son of the head coach, I wonder if there's a little bit of motivation there for Iowa to finish out the year on a high note. But it's really just, other than that, it's a contrast in styles. You've got the Tennessee offense the high-powered Tennessee offense that hasn't quite been up to that level, but the tempo against a very slow, very deliberate Iowa offense. It could not be two more contrasting offensive styles unless you're talking about like the option, the air raid in the game.
Yeah. So how many points is it going to take to win it? I mean, will 20 points for either side win the game?
Yeah, if Tennessee can get to 20 or 24, I think they can win this game.
All right. I can't wait for the Nico debuts. 56 points on this incredible defense. That'd be man. The Tennessee fans would just be mad they didn't get to see him more.
Imagine the message boards if Nico starts or plays well, and it'll be, why wasn't he playing all season, right?
Exactly. All right, how about the Texas Bowl, Steve? This is a pretty interesting matchup. A&M versus Oklahoma State, which of course went to the Big 12 championship, just got their brakes beat off them. But we don't know what to expect from A&M. Their interim coach just left to become Syracuse defensive coordinator. So I mean, I don't have any clue what this is going to look like for the Aggies.
Yeah, that's it. I don't know what to expect out of A&M in the bowl game because of all the coaching changes, all of the personnel turnover, guys going to the NFL. If there's some guys who opt to transfer, just a lot of uncertainty for A&M. If the motivation is there and A&M is relatively at full strength, they should win this game. The biggest reason why I think is the defensive line for A&M. We saw this in the Big 12 championship game. Oklahoma State, any success they have has to start with the run game. Ollie Gordon is one of the best running backs in college football this year. He couldn't get anything going against Texas. If A&M does the same thing and the motivation is there, and frankly, it probably should be because they're playing in their home state against an old Big 12 foe. Texas A&M, the matchups favor them in this game. I felt Oklahoma State, while they were 9-4 this year, there were times this year where they were pretty fortunate doing it with a little bit of smoke and mirrors at times. So this matchup, I think, favors A&M if the motivation is there.
Now, how about this one, Stephen? When they announced this excited me here. The Gator Bowl, Kentucky versus Clemson. I think you could argue both these coaches, they really need a win here. Mark Stoops I get it. They beat Louisville, so that completely took off any warming under his seat. But then the A&M fiasco happened. We've had players jump into the portal. Clemson, on the other hand, people may recognize Kentucky as a good football program, but I guarantee you the Clemson fans don't, and they will have no respect for losing to this Kentucky team. So to me, it's almost like a must-win for both two very established coaches to keep some momentum. What's your thoughts on this Gator Bowl matchup?
I think the big concern I would have if I'm Kentucky is Clemson's defense is outstanding. And we saw this against South Carolina just 2 weeks ago. They can just suffocate these opponents. I mean, their defensive line is so good at getting pressure, and they cover well too, which is kind of a bad setup for Kentucky considering that Ray Davis may not be in there. The up and down sort of play of Devin Leary this season. He did play them when he was quarterback at NC State and beat Clemson in 2021. This on paper, the first kind of glance seems like a very low scoring game. Clemson doesn't hit big plays in the passing game. Kentucky has trouble covering, but pretty good against the run, and that could be trouble for Clemson's offense. So it is a game, to your point, where it is a bowl game, but the off-season narrative sort of for both. When you add in what happens here, Clemson's made some staff changes. What does Kentucky do in the portal? There's some narratives that could start to form here or could be helped depending on what happens in this matchup.
Yeah. How about the Music City Bowl, Stephen? We got Auburn, Maryland, Mike Loxley, former SEC assistant here. So I've already seen Hugh say our fans going to take over Broadway. I didn't know he knew about Broadway, but apparently Hugh's been down there. Thoughts on this matchup, Auburn, Maryland?
Couple old SEC friends, like you mentioned, Mike Loxley, Talia Tagovailoa, the quarterback for Maryland. Maryland, I think it's fair to say maybe a little disappointing this year. They started out, I think, 5-0. They played Ohio State tough, and then they had some kind of questionable losses, and they played Michigan tough. But overall, I think they were, after that start, they kind of tailed off. So I think, what does that mean for Auburn? I think it means that line of scrimmage, they're vulnerable. They've had trouble protecting the quarterback, and they've had trouble stopping the run. And I think if you're Auburn, you have to feel optimistic that you can go into this game, run the ball, get pressure on Tagovailoa, and sort of control the line of scrimmage and find a way to win this game. So I also think, we've talked about like off-season narratives. If you're Auburn and you win this game, I know they had close calls against Georgia and Alabama, and they lost to New Mexico State, but you can win this game. You stack a good recruiting class, you stack a couple key transfers. There's the potential here to sort of start to win the offseason, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I got you. And then one final one, Stephen, here. Again, SEC fans, I think you want to tune into this, get a feel for the Oklahoma Sooners. I think this is one of the, the outside of the playoff, outside of the New Year's Six, this is a damn good matchup here, Stephen. Oklahoma, Arizona in the Alamo Bowl, new offense, new quarterback for Oklahoma. Well, I have heard Dillon Gabriel, he may play in it, but that's so weird. I highly doubt it. I think with him going in the portal, it's Jackson Arnold's show, the freshman quarterback. Thoughts on this matchup? Because I believe Arizona, one of the hottest teams in the country, the last second half of the season.
Absolutely. Yeah. Arizona, without a doubt, was one of the most improved teams from last year to this year. They nearly beat Washington. They finished 9-3. They also had the close call against Mississippi State early in the season. And I think some of the things that they can do in this game, their defense is much improved, but also their offense is really fun to watch. And if you're an SEC fan looking for a reason to tune in, I think number one, there could be a lot of points, but number two, if we start thinking ahead to next season, like what can we actually get out of these bowl games? I think we can get a good look at Jackson Arnold. I mean, the fact that he's going to if he starts this game where he plays a lot against a good Arizona team that is either a favorite, kind of a slight underdog, depending on where you look, this is going to be one of the probably more competitive bowl games outside of the New Year's Six. So I think there's a lot of intrigue for me on seeing what Oklahoma looks like with some of these new faces as we go into next year. It's not everything, but I think it'll give us a good idea of kind of where they stand and how they're performing as we go into the new era with Oklahoma and the SEC.
Right. And I can just hear it, the excitement in your voice, Stephen, to watch these bowl games. It'll be the final college football action we have for many, many months. So, I tell the fans to savor these. I mean, I've already seen it. Some people are like, I don't care about this, don't care about that. Well, you'll care when it's February. You'll care when it's March. And there's nothing but the round ball to watch. You know what I mean?
Hey, we only get, 14 of these Saturdays, and we have 41 bowl games plus the national championship left. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, give me every, famous buttery toaster bowl and the Myrtle Beach Bowl, the Quick Lane Bowl. I'm going to watch all these because when February hits, I'm going to be going to YouTube to find like the old like SEC championship game to watch or something to sort of fulfill my need for college football. So I always think about bowl games like this. I don't know that they mean team A is better than team B, especially now because the rosters, the coaching changes and everything. But I think I watch them, number one, because it's our last college football of the year. But also they're going to be guys who are playing in these games that we didn't get to see shine this year. And it's also the last time that we'll get to see Cody Schrader play at Missouri. It's the last time Joe Milton will play at Tennessee. Some fans will be excited about some of those being gone, but it's one more time with those guys in those uniforms. And it's also a chance to see some of the new stars for 2024. So that's how I look at them and how I would watch them if I was just sitting on the couch looking for something to watch around the holidays.
Yeah. Well, Stephen, I kept you long enough here. Before you go, real quick, can you tell the audience where can they follow you and where can they find your work?
Absolutely. So you can follow me on Twitter at Athlon Steven. You can also check out my YouTube page, all CFB 365. Also on Instagram, TikTok at Stephen L CFB. Also co-host the Cover Two podcast every Wednesday. Cover Two podcast by Athlon Sports every Wednesday, talking everything, all things college football.
Well, I appreciate you, buddy, and can't wait next week to jump back on. And I can only imagine the portal movement and shakes and coaching changes and the SEC's. It's going to be looking a lot different even a week from today.
Absolutely. The portal is already, I think, over 1,000 something players, maybe even close to 2,000 this offseason. So who knows by next week, but looking forward to it. We've had a crazy start to the offseason. It's only going to get probably crazier in the next 2 weeks or so.